Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we're in Luke chapter 5. We'll be in verses 1 through 14. That's the first couple of stories there. It's maybe cutting off a couple verses at the end, depending on how you count it, but they're not really a part of the stories that we're going to cover. As Jesus is entering into his ministry, he has passed his first test. The first temptation of Jesus is, noted or extrapolated out in Luke chapter 4. In Luke 3, he gets baptized, he gets selected by the Holy Spirit, as it were, not in the weird heretical sense that Jesus wasn't the Son of God until the Holy Spirit came upon him, but in the sense that the Holy Spirit has now come upon him, verifying his identity, proclaiming to John and the rest of all the people at the Jordan River who were there that Jesus is, in fact, the Son of God, and that he is, in fact, to be listened to. And so when you see that, he is, he's given a bit of divine clout, as it were. That's a terrible way to say that, but that's the way we're going to say that. In chapter 4, then, Jesus goes out into the wilderness. Now that he's become the Son of God, not in the heretical way, now that he's declared to be the Son of God, wow, it's almost enough to make me restart the recording, but I'm not going to. Now that he has been declared the Son of God, Satan comes out and makes an obvious attempt on his life, or rather spiritual life, or rather spiritual well-being, on his righteousness, as it were. He goes out and tempts Jesus. He calls Jesus to do something evil. He says, if you are the Son of God, you should do this thing, right? Turn the stones into bread. Oh, well, Jesus says no. If you are the Son of God, you should jump off the temple. Oh, well, Jesus says no. And I know that Luke actually gets it out of order. Matthew and Luke, in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, respectively, have two different accounts of the temptation of Jesus, quote unquote. Matthew's account is the bread, then the temple, then the mountain. And Luke's account is the bread, then the mountain, then the temple. I think Matthew's account is the right one. I think Matthew's account is the clearer one and probably how it actually happened, and Luke got things out of order. I know that's a very unpopular take, but I also like Matthew as a gospel better than Luke, and so I'm probably biased in that way. Whatever works. I don't think it actually matters. Not much substantively changes. I think Matthew's is a more coherent recounting of the temptation personally, but whatever. If you prefer Luke's, then by all means read Luke's and go with it. Either of the, whatever way it's phrased, Jesus went through the same three temptations. He experienced the same three events. I just think he experienced them in Matthew's order instead of Luke's order, and I know that people would disagree with that on the whole, and you can have your own opinion on that if you want to. The point is, Jesus has very clearly established himself and started his ministry. He started by being declared the Son of God publicly so that everyone would know it. The Holy Spirit comes down and says, wow, this is God's Son. You should probably listen to him. That was Luke 3. He starts by going into the wilderness. He's led into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit and is tempted to prove that he is tempted as we are, yet without sin. And by the way, at the end of Luke chapter 4, as much as we call that, the temptation of Jesus, Luke 4:13, for example, when the devil had finished every temptation, he left him until an opportune time. This is not that Jesus got tempted once and then he passed the test and so he's never tempted again. This is Jesus proved himself that he was righteous. And so God says, and so he continues on throughout his life. One of the things that you see in the temptation of Jesus, and this is really turning into a sermon on the temptation of Jesus, is you see a picture of Satan trying to give Jesus the tools to avoid what's going to happen, right? The crucifixion is going to draw all men to himself, but Satan says, I can give all men to you if you just bow down and worship me, right? You can shortcut it. You don't have to go through the horrible pain and agony. Well, later on when Peter would say, when Jesus says, I'm going to have to go to Jerusalem to suffer and to die, Peter says, no, Lord, this will not happen to you, to which Jesus very famously says, get behind me, Satan. Well, why does he say that? It's because it's the same temptation that Satan was hitting Jesus with all the way back in Luke 4 or Matthew 4. And so the idea that Jesus got tempted once and passed the test and is never tempted again is very silly. These same temptations, the temptation to rely on oneself, the temptation to do one's own thing, to go outside the will of God, to be self-sufficient, as it were, and to try and get outside of God's boundaries, all of these temptations pop up multiple times, many times over in Jesus' life. It's just that Jesus doesn't actually give in to those things. So when Hebrews says, he is tempted as in all things as we are, yet without sin, absolutely correct, and you see it even in the temptation accounts or even going after that. Jesus is finally here, entering into his ministry. People know he's the Son of God, or people know that the Holy Spirit has claimed he's the Son of God. People are starting to see he is tempted, and yet he passes those tests. He's starting to do some miracles in the rest of Luke chapter 4. He's starting to do a lot of teaching in the rest of Luke 4. He's starting into his ministry, and now we reach the point where he needs his disciples. But nobody really knows what to expect. And so Luke 5 is the first instance of the disciples actually being called. But there's a question on who this is. Like, who is this Jesus guy? What does he do? How does he work? What is he capable of? We don't exactly know. He is a relative newcomer to the area. He's been there for 30 years, but he hasn't been teaching. Nobody really knows who he is. They don't really know his track record. The best he's got is from Luke chapter 4. His family said, the people in his town say, okay, we know who he is. He's just like a craftsman. Why is he teaching? How is he able to teach? And why is he teaching? Why does he think he's qualified to do this? People don't know what to expect from Jesus. People are not really trusting of Jesus. What in the world is this Jesus looking for, and what's he capable of? We don't exactly know. Luke 5 gives us the answer to those questions, because you have a couple of questions that arrive with that. What can Jesus do? Well, we don't really know. And also, what is Jesus willing to do? Well, we don't really know that either. Luke 5 is a good opening for Luke to explore those couple of ideas, and he does so. He arranges his gospel in this way to help communicate Jesus' capabilities, but also Jesus' want and his willingness to help people. So you're going to see this. If you're supposed to trust Jesus, which is kind of why the Gospel of Luke is written, which is why all of the Gospels are written, if you're supposed to trust Jesus, you need to know that he can help. And it's not just about his raw capability, it's about his willingness to help. And that's where you're going to see, that's what you're going to see in the first 14 verses of Luke 5. Let's read those together. Luke 5, starting in verse 1. Now it happened that while the crowd was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put a little distance from the land. And he sat down and continued teaching the crowds from the boat. Now when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let your nets down for a catch." Simon responded and said, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But I will do as you say and let down the nets." And when they had done this, they caught a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to tear. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats to the point that they were sinking. But when Simon Peter saw this, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And likewise also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not fear. From now on you will be catching people." When they brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. We'll pause there for now. That's the first story, the first account, talking about Jesus' ability. When you start to wonder who Jesus is, there's a natural question: what can this guy do? How capable is he? What is his capability? Can he help? If I have a problem in my life, can Jesus help? And before he's actually called anyone, Jesus comes out to make an impression. This is specifically with Peter, probably Andrew, James, and John, the 2 boats. We have named here. We have Simon, who is also called Peter. We have Peter. We have James and John, the sons of Zebedee. We don't have Andrew, who's specifically named here, but Andrew was Simon's fishing partner. He was his brother. They were of the same trade, and so they worked together. This is, it's curious to me. We don't have Andrew named here, although if you think about Jesus's primary three disciples, like kind of his inner circle, it would be Peter, James, and John. And so it's not actually that much of a surprise that we would get those three named, and Andrew's kind of floating off to the side somewhere. Andrew was important because he introduced Peter to Jesus. All the way, we read that in John chapter 1, I believe it is. But after that, it's really Peter, and it's Peter and James and John who have the closer relationship, and Andrew is, he was a conduit for Jesus and Peter to meet, but he is a secondary character, kind of. You have this picture of Jesus's capability. Can Jesus help? In the problems that arise in life, can Jesus help? And the answer is absolutely yes. The story set up here is Jesus preaching and teaching in the area with many people listening to him. And so, since there are so many people and he's at the edge of a lake, he says, you know what? I'm going to get in a boat. There are a couple boats here. I'm going to hop in and put one out from shore, and then I'll be able to talk. The reasoning for this, I've usually heard it explained that water is kind of a natural amphitheater. It can carry some sounds, and so in order for Jesus not to have to shout to reach everybody, if he goes out in a boat a little ways and he gets a little bit of water between him, his voice actually echoes out and becomes a little bit easier to hear. And so maybe that's one reason he's doing this. Maybe it's just he doesn't want to be stuck in the crowd. He wants to have a little bit of space between him and all the people, because there are a lot of people here, evidently. Maybe it's just so that he can leave the fishermen alone. And so he says, hey, fishermen, sorry, can you take me out to sea a little bit so that I can talk from the boat instead of crowding into your space? Now, it happens to be that he gets in Peter's boat. They're recovering from fishing. Peter says, look, we've been out all night and we haven't caught anything. Unfortunate. Fishermen would be all night, or out all night to go and get fish. Even today, if you go fishing, which I don't for a reason, you have to get up really early in the morning and go out basically when it's still dark. Something about how the fish bite better at night than they do during the day, or something like that. I don't know. I'm not a fish psychologist. I don't know why they do what they do. But it's apparently easier at night. Fishermen going out at night is a classic. It's a tradition, and Peter has been out all evening disappointed because he hasn't caught anything. Peter, as a master fisherman, would know that the fish are not biting, and so he's just kind of mending his nets or washing his nets, repairing his stuff, preparing for the next night when they're going to go out and fish again and try to get some fish at that time. Jesus says, can we go out on the water? Peter says, okay, sure. And so Peter takes him out there, presumably continues fixing his nets while Jesus is teaching. After Jesus is done teaching, Jesus starts to say some things to Peter. In verse 3, he goes and he teaches. In verse 4, he finishes speaking, and then he says to Peter, okay, why don't you go and try to catch some fish, Peter? To which Peter, the fisherman, replies, that's not really how fish work, right? We were out all night. We didn't catch anything. If you don't catch anything at night, you know you're not going to catch anything during the day. What are the odds that we're actually going to get anything out of this? And the odds are basically zero, Jesus. But okay, since you told me to, fine, I will do it. It's interesting to see Peter's response here. He knows, logically, right, the human fisherman part of his mind that knows what the job is, knows that it's not going to be effective for him to step out in the day and then go fish again. He knows he's not going to actually get anything from this, but he's willing to do it anyway. You notice as he opens this, in verse 5, he says, Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but I will do as you say, right? He has a basic respect for Jesus, Master or Lord, or you're the authority figure, you're the one in charge. I don't think this is going to work, but you said for me to do it, and so I will go and do it. This is the Master. He is to be obeyed. It may defy your human logic, and it may defy Peter's logic, and it absolutely does. The fish are not biting, but I will do as you say, and I will go let down the net. When you're talking to God, when you're thinking about God, you are allowed to say, hey, this does not make sense to me, as long as you go ahead and do it anyway, right? You're allowed to say, this shouldn't work, and then go do it. because God told you to do it. At the end of the day, he is the master and you are the slave or servant, if that makes you feel better about it. You're going to be a slave to something, or servant, if that makes you feel better about it. You're going to be enslaved to something, to good or evil. You're going to be enslaved to God or Satan. You're going to owe your allegiance to one of them and be forced to obey whatever it is. You do not have a neutral option. There is no third way out. It's either good or bad. You can be one or the other. You're not going to be somewhere in the middle. You can obey God, or you cannot. If you don't, you will not get a reward for obeying, obviously. You are allowed to say whatever you want to in the service. You're allowed to say, this doesn't make sense. You're allowed to say, I don't really understand this. You're allowed to say, God, this isn't going to work, as long as you go and do it. Because at the end of the day, you're still a slave. If God has commanded, you can say, I don't know about that one, but you have to go and do it. If you don't go and do it, you're on the devil's side. You're on the side of evil. You're sinning against the Lord. If you don't obey, you're not going to get the rewards of obedience. But you are allowed to question as long as you continue to do it. Job asked plenty of questions, but he stayed righteous for the most part. He was trying to convince his friend, help his friends to understand who God was for the most part. The only thing that becomes a problem with Job is he ends up getting a bit prideful. He ends up putting God on trial and saying much more than, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, but I'm going to be obedient. And the first couple of chapters of Job, it was, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there, blessed be the name of the Lord, right? I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to glorify God anyway, was what Job's attitude was. Then you get to the latter chapters of Job, and Job says, God doesn't know what he's talking about. If he came down and put me on trial, I would win. And that's when God steps in and says, no, you wouldn't win, idiot. Nicely, not very nicely, actually. He comes down in a whirlwind, and it's horrifying and terrifying, and Job is proven wrong. You're allowed to say pretty much whatever you want to, but you have to obey. And when you stop obeying is when God starts taking issue with it. God's people do not have to understand everything all the time. We don't have to know why things work. As long as we know that they work, as long as we know what our work is within the paradigm, as long as we know what we are commanded to do and are obedient to it. You don't have to understand for it to be effective. So Peter and the others, against their, what they would call their better judgment, what we might call from the more nuanced point of view, their human judgment, Peter and the others go back out. And when they obey, when they throw out their nets, they are immediately provided for. This is in some ways Jesus kind of rendering them a payment for their boat, which is kind of interesting. They have done him a favor. They have taken him out on the boat. They didn't have to, but they did. They were willing to. They didn't have to lower the nets either, but they did. They were willing to. And so Jesus ends up rewarding them for that. Their obedience is good, and against their better judgment or against their human judgment, they are well provided for. Not even with 2 boats and 3 or probably 4 men can they actually handle the bounty that God has given them. This is an impossibility. This can't happen, and it's true. According to your human judgment, this shouldn't be able to happen, but it does, because God is above your human judgment. God is a little bit better than that. He can do some things that you can't. And when faced with this impossibility, Peter has this realization. They're pulling in so many fish, it's to the point that the boats are sinking. And Simon sees this in verse 8 and starts to go to Jesus and kind of beg with him. How can something happen like this? How can something like this happen? It's not through the power of man. No, this is through only God. The question often comes up in some of the other accounts of miracles that Jesus does. What kind of man can do this? And I know that's not mentioned here. That's not said here. But it's clearly what they're thinking. Simon, when he receives all these fish, he falls down at Jesus' knees and says, "Get away from me. I am a sinful man." He says, "Get away from me, Lord." An even nicer honorific than just master. What kind of man can do this? I am sinful. I can't do this. You've done something that is miraculous. You've done something divine. How can I do anything? How can I have anything to do with something like that? You are holy and I am not. Peter recognizes there's a distinction there. He gets a message and he goes right to Jesus before they're even finished pulling in the fish and taking care of that. He abandons his work, he abandons what his friends are doing, and instead of trying to help the boats not capsize, he's busy falling at Jesus' knees. I know God says, when you work, work as unto the Lord. Paul writes in one of his letters, or actually I think a couple of his letters, if you're going to do work, do it as if you're working for God directly, not just a human being. Be very diligent in performing your physical job. You also see that some things are more important than your physical job, which is to say, if Jesus is standing right in front of you, maybe it's better to, sit at his feet and pay attention than it is to perform your physical job and then sit at his feet and listen. The picture of Mary and Martha comes to mind. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet listening. Martha is busy tidying up the house and cooking or whatever. Martha says, "Hey, can you tell Mary to come and help me?" And Jesus says, "Look, the important thing is that she's listening to me, not that you're cleaning the house. I get that you're cleaning the house. That's great. It's really not that important. You can make a good decision if you want to, Martha." And Martha is left to determine that herself. There are some things that are more important than your physical job, such as being aware of Jesus and submitting yourself to him accordingly. When you ask the question if Jesus can help you, the answer is absolutely yes. And there are also a few implications that you need to reckon with as you go through that. When Jesus comes in to provide his help, when Jesus arrives and he is able to help you, you start to see a few things. You start to see some things about the work between you and him and how you two function together. You see the difference between you and him. When Peter arrives at this conclusion, when he sees what Jesus is doing, he falls down at Jesus' knees. I don't know if this is Peter kneeling. I don't know if this is Peter going full-on prostrate, like face down in the boat. I don't know if he's doing both or back and forth between the two. I don't know exactly what the picture looks like. What I do know is Peter sees and recognizes how great Jesus was and then engages in some kind of worship for him. And Jesus, by the way, he doesn't say no. The angels, when you fall down at their feet, the angels say, "No, don't do that. I'm just a messenger." Jesus, when people fall down at his feet, Jesus says, "Okay." It's a pretty clear distinction that Jesus considers himself to be equal with God and not just an angel, not just a messenger, not just a creative being. Take that, Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Go read the Bible sometime instead of the whatever bootleg version you guys made. That's not a very nice way to say it, but it's true. Whatever. I doubt any Jehovah's Witnesses listen to this stuff anyway. Cults don't usually like you listening to other things. Did I just imply they were a cult? That would be terrible. I would never do such a thing. Of course I would. They are. Jesus is to be honored, so you honor him appropriately. He is God, very clearly. He always has been, right? Read the Bible. He is, I hate to fall back on like old terminology or kind of ritualistic terms, but he is co-eternal with God, which just means he has existed as long as God has existed because he is God. Jesus is God, and you can't separate the two of them. That's he just is a part of God. He is completely God. He is one of the Trinity, however that works. Trinity being a human word, but you understand the concept. I don't even know how it works, but here we are. Sometimes you can believe in things, even though you know they're a logical human impossibility. You can still believe in some things, like how Peter was willing to go out and fish for fish, even though he knew that the fish would not come, and then the fish came anyway. So very interesting how that nice little point dovetails right there. When you start to see Jesus and what he can do, you recognize the difference between you and him. You also recognize the distance between you and him. When Peter addresses Jesus, he says, "Go away," right? And not in the kind of antagonistic, "I don't like you" kind of way, but in the "Go away, I am sinful. You are not. You are holy. I am sinful. I am messed up and you are good, and I don't want to taint you with the things that I have," right? Jesus is good. Jesus is beautiful. Jesus is perfect. Jesus is all these nice things. and we are less so. One might even say we are not. Seeing God's perfection reminds us of our corruption and our evil. When you look and you see Jesus and you see what he can do, you recognize there's a difference between you and him. You also recognize there's a distance between you and him. But the third thing you also recognize is the relationship between you and him. Because the fact that Jesus is appearing to Peter and working with Peter shows that there is a relationship between them. When Jesus answers Peter in verse 10 down there, Jesus says, "Don't fear," which is the typical divine greeting or angelic greeting when these beings come down from heaven. The answer is, hey, don't be afraid, right? You see it all the time when the angels appear in the Old Testament. You see it also here in Luke 5. Jesus says, don't be afraid, signifying he is a divine being, either God or an angel, something like that. Obviously, it's God, but, angels do it too. That kind of picture. Angels don't accept worship. Jesus does. That sets him apart as God. But he is using the typical divine greeting of, do not be afraid. Yes, Jesus is above you. That it's as simple as that, right? Jesus is better than you are. Tough. Deal with it. That's how it goes. But as much as Jesus is above you, he's also willing to talk to you. And that's a pretty cool thing that most people, a lot of people don't appreciate or fail to appreciate. You have to understand, a lot of people, when they imagine Jesus coming down to earth, unfortunately think that that means Jesus is just kind of like us human beings and just kind of on our level, I guess. I mean, like, he is better because, he didn't sin and stuff like that, but he's just kind of a human being, and so he's just, pretty normal. Nowhere in the Bible is that true. Jesus is very, very unique. You did not earn the ability for him to come down and talk to you. You didn't earn the capability for him to be a human. You didn't bring him down to your level. You didn't ascend to his level. He has willingly come down to your level, but he is still infinitely better than we are. Don't demean Jesus's impressiveness. Don't demean his honor. He is above you, but he is still willing to talk to you. That's the wonderful balance. We serve a God not like all the fake gods that exist that are better than humanity or too good for humanity or unwilling to communicate with humanity or hateful towards humanity. We serve a God who loves humanity, the only God who exists, who created us in his image and wants us to do well. He's trying to help, but we just keep on refusing. He is above you, but he's also willing to talk to you. Christianity's God is very unique in that. And even when you try and say, Christians and Mormons and Muslims and Jews, they all serve the same God. No, we really don't. Because Jesus in being willing and capable of displaying himself in human form, coming down and being a human, has fundamentally set himself apart from all the other versions of God that are, at best, incomplete pictures of who God is, such as the Jews' view of God from the Old Testament. At best, that is an incomplete view of who the Lord is, because they don't have Jesus, they don't have the Son, they don't have the Spirit, they don't know how all those things work together. And granted, I don't have a perfect grasp on it either, but because of Jesus and his existence, I have a much better grasp on it than someone who just reads the Old Testament and doesn't understand who the Messiah even is at this point. Jesus comes down and he shows you there is still a relationship between you and him. He says, don't fear, and then he says this as well, don't fear, from now on you'll be catching people, you'll be fishers of men. I knew you were a fisherman, but now you'll be fishers of men. God is funny sometimes. Sometimes some people don't appreciate this. God has a sense of humor. I don't know what it is exactly, but that's kind of funny. It's just a little pun, right? You used to be a fisherman. Now you're going to fish men. Haha. It's not very funny. It's kind of like a dad joke, I guess, which kind of fits with God being the Father, like we talked about last week. That's the idea, is you're going to fish for people now. There is a call for you to work for him. Nobody is saying that you earned a spot with him, Peter. Nobody is saying that you deserve Jesus being on your boat. Nobody is saying that you are good enough to stand in his presence. But Jesus is saying, hey, I'm willing to work with you. Hey, can you work for me? Right? I am willing to help you out. if you're willing to work for me. Jesus is offering him a trade deal. I receive your work. I give you all your help. Jesus has entered into an agreement with Peter. If you work for me, a lot of things will go well. If you work for me, I'll help you. Doesn't mean that everything in life is going to be nice. Actually, most of your life is not going to be very nice. But you will be eternally secure. And that's a pretty good deal. You are a sinful man, Peter. There is nowhere does Jesus say you're not a sinful man, but what he says is, look, I can work through sinful people too. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus can do something about removing that sin. You start to see the relationship between you and him. The relationship is Jesus showing you grace, and it is a glorious kind of grace. You also start to see the responsibility you've been given. The response for them is, in verse 11, when they finally pull their boats back to land, with all the fish intact, I assume, then they just leave everything, and they follow him, because they know they have a responsibility towards Jesus. Jesus has called them. There is no turning back. Jesus has told them to follow him. There is no way to turn around and go the other direction. They have the free will. They could choose to do it, but as Peter would say later on, who else are we supposed to go to? You have the words of eternal life. Like, how could we turn away from this opportunity when we see how good and how capable you really are? Jesus' call is a responsibility. It's also a blessing. It's a reminder to do the work you're supposed to and to not let the earthly things distract you. Sometimes we let ourselves get in the way. The things on the earth get in the way of true spiritual obedience to God. If your job is so distracting that you cannot work on your job and also, be at worship and go think about God and spend time in his word and do all these things, if your job is too much for you, maybe you should quit your job and go be faithful to God instead. Which one's more important? We're going to talk more on Friday about the idea of focus and what's the most important thing to you. What exactly are Christians supposed to be looking for and looking forward to? Maybe if you're not exactly focused, you need to fix that. Don't let earthly things distract you from the real work, which is following Jesus. The disciples don't. Peter, James, and John, and presumably Andrew, all leave their nets and followed him. Can Jesus help you? The answer is absolutely. And what does it mean when he helps you? It means absolutely everything. God is good, so be obedient, be righteous, and seek his will. If God has called you, which he has, then you should be responding in faith. God can help you. He's perfectly capable of it. But sometimes, even though we're perfectly capable of things, we just don't do them anyway. And that's unfortunate, right? Because sometimes that can help to sow a little seed of doubt on us. I am perfectly capable of living out of my car. I'm not going to do it. Why would I do that? That would be terrible. I would not like that at all. It would not be comfortable for me. It would not be to my preference, and so I'm not going to do it. I can. But just because I can doesn't mean I will, unless I'm forced into it, right? And at that point, it's not really I can choose to do it. It's just being forced into it. If I can help you, that doesn't mean I will help you. Just because I can do something for you doesn't mean that I will do something for you. Just because I can get you a present doesn't mean I will get you a present. Just because I can get you the thing you want doesn't mean that I will get you the thing I want, or the thing you want. Just because God can do something doesn't mean he will do something. So then what's all that for, right? We spend so long talking about if God can help, and we establish the idea that he can help, and that's great. But then will he help? That's kind of the question. Does he have the willingness to help? In this instance, Jesus comes to Simon Peter and he basically volunteers his help, and Simon Peter takes it. Okay, sure, that's fine. But in the next instance, in verses 12 through 14, Jesus isn't coming and offering his aid to anyone. He has to be asked for it. I know God can help, but will he help? Does he want to help? Is he willing to help? I just don't know until I ask. Isn't he high and holy and righteous and perfect and all these things we're not? How on earth could I approach him and ask? Well, this is how. Verses 12 through 14. While he was in one of the cities, behold, there was a man covered with leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell down on his face and begged him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And he reached out with his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him. And he ordered him to tell no one, saying, But go and show yourself to the priest, and make an offering for your cleansing, just as Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. And the news about him was spreading even further, and large crowds were gathering to him to be healed of their sicknesses, but Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. I said verses 15 and 16 weren't exactly relevant. They're more about the overarching scope of Jesus's work more than the individual story, and so, just read them, but they don't really play into affecting verses 12 through 14. I know God can help. I don't know if God is willing to help, and that's the major question. There's a man with leprosy. Leprosy just being a generic term for skin disease, of course, not a massive problem, I guess. Not all the time, technically, right? Skin disease can be anywhere from a small patch of eczema that doesn't do anything to your whole body is rotting and falling apart. Leprosy is just a very general term. Of course, under the Old Testament, leprosy made you unclean, and if you were unclean, you weren't supposed to be coming in and worshiping before God. You were kind of cut off from the community until you were cleansed, which sometimes leprosy just doesn't go away. Sometimes it does. You have a skin condition and then it goes away and you can come back into society. Sometimes it's a terrible skin condition that rots you away and then you can never see anyone ever again. Leprosy can be very minimal. It can be absolutely devastating. Either way, it separates you from God. This man has a problem. A man has leprosy, and this man specifically is one who is called full of leprosy, or it's covered with leprosy in verse 12. Luke, who wrote this, presumably we ascribe the name Luke to this. That's what early traditions have said. Luke was a physician, a doctor. That's what Paul calls him in the end of one of his letters. He says, Luke, the beloved physician, will do something. I think it's the beloved physician is with me. Luke would be very familiar with leprosy. He would be familiar with skin disease. When he says the man is covered in leprosy, this is not good for him. This is not something where he's out for a month while his skin patches itself back up and then he's good to go. This is something where he has been condemned for who knows how many years, and he's going to be condemned for however many years more. As Jesus is traveling and his reputation is spreading, this fully diseased man comes up to him. No one can help him. No one can cure his disease. But we know one who can cure his disease. Jesus could. The question is, this is just a random guy. Like, why would Jesus help this guy? Jesus doesn't know this guy from Adam, is the way we would say it. I mean, given that he's God, maybe he does remember creating the guy, and the man experiences leprosy and then prays about it, and then God probably has it in his databank somewhere. So, there's confusion there, but the human being doesn't know the human being, right? This leprous man has never met Jesus in his life. Jesus has never met the leprous man in his life. There is no contact. There is no real reason. There is no human reason why Jesus should go out of his way and help this man. Why should Jesus pay attention to him? There is no reason that he should. But the man goes and asks anyways. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. There's value in asking. If you do not ask, you will not receive. If you do not ask, how would you get an answer? If you don't ask, Jesus isn't going to answer. But Jesus, as the leper goes to him, he clearly shows signs of respect, and he asks for Jesus' help. This is how he asks, and it's very, very important. If you want Jesus' help, then ask humbly. If you are willing, it's just another way of saying your will be done, isn't it? If you are willing to do this, then you can heal me. If not, then I won't be healed. That gives Jesus the prerogative to choose whichever he thinks is better or whichever one he wants to do. If is a very powerful word, right? I would like this if it's in my best interest. I would like this if it's part of your plan. I would like it if you're willing to. You could, but I don't know if that's what's best or not. Asking God, instead of trying to demand something from God, instead of trying to order God around, instead of trying to twist God's arm and force him to obey you and listen to you, just saying, I would like this if you are willing. That can go a really long way for both your mentality about what you're asking for and God's willingness to come in and actually acquiesce to your request. Ask humbly. Go to God. You have to ask sometime. So when you ask humbly. That's very important. When God gives, he gives freely. When God approaches him, the man approaches Jesus, the man approaches God and asks for it, and Jesus says, sure, right? You ask humbly, sure, I'll do that. I am willing, be cleansed. And that's all there is to it. It shows you the character of Jesus, isn't it? That and the willingness to heal him, as well as the willingness to extend his hand and touch him. In the old law, if you touched someone who was unclean, you would be made unclean. But Jesus, and if you touch someone with a disease, you likely you raise your chances of also catching a disease of some sort from the person. But Jesus, when he touches the man, says, I am willing. Be cleansed. He touches the man, and the cleanness of Jesus flows out into the man and cleans up the man's leprosy. Jesus is so perfect and so holy and so clean that when he touches things that aren't right, they become right. They go away, right? The evil is scraped off, and the goodness shines forth. When Jesus touches something that is wrong, the wrongness evaporates away. Very, very cool picture. But it really shows you who Jesus is, that he is willing to give freely. It shows you the character of Jesus. It's not just that he can help. He's willing to help. He wants to help when he's asked, and when he's asked in the right way. It's not just that God is capable. It's that he is willing. Will Jesus help? The answer is yes, as long as you ask humbly and as long as you listen faithfully. The other command in this section is in verse 14, when Jesus comes in and when Jesus says to him, now that you're clean, the leprosy has gone in verse 13. And then what does Jesus say? He says, obey. Now that you're clean, go to the priest. Didn't Jesus just clean him? Isn't Jesus, holy? Isn't he God? Didn't he verify that things were clean? Doesn't he know that things are right? Yes, he does. But the old law specified you should go to the priest. Go to the priest for verification. The priest will check over you. You have to make an offering for cleansing. That's how the Old Testament was written, just as Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. That was the command of God. In the old law, cleansed people, even if you were clean, you needed verification for that. And so Jesus, when he cleans the man, sends the man to the priest to get verification. And it does look like this man went. We never read about him specifically going or the results of his test or whatever it is, but it does seem that this man actually did go. This was a faithful request. He's not just using Jesus for personal gain. Jesus says, you are clean, but now you have to do something about it, right? Righteousness, right? Cleanness has been given to you, but you need to complete righteousness. You need to fulfill God's plan. You're not actually clean. You may be technically clean, but you're not going to really be cleansed until you go and fulfill the rest of the law, which has been told to you, to go and to sacrifice, to go to the priest, to go and finish the rest of the law. You want to go through the cleansing process, fine, but you need to go to the priest to get it finished. God has already written what has been said. God has already written out the law, and you need to follow that law to actually be cleansed. If he doesn't go to the priest, he won't be really cleansed. And so he goes, and so he obeys. It's not just that Jesus can help. He will. He wants to help. But there are requirements. You have to ask in faith. You have to ask in a humble manner to approach Jesus and have the willingness to actually request what you need of him and to have the willingness to let him Make the decision on what you ultimately get. You also need to listen to what he says. You need to obey the law that has been written. As much as Jesus might be able to heal you in an instant, he totally can, should he choose to, but you need to finish the rest of the law. You need to still obey. You know the things that God has commanded. You need to pay attention to those. Too many people miss that. Too many people say, Jesus can help, Jesus will help, and then they just go on their way. There are requirements for that. If you ask, Jesus will help. If you don't ask, he may well not help. And what happens if he does help and you neglect the rest of his law? Do you think he's going to be inclined to help next time? If you listen to God, God will do what's best for you. He will help. But you have to actually obey. You have to put yourself in the game and actually fulfill the things that God has commanded. It should be said at this point as we wrap up, the answer is not always going to be yes. The answer is not always going to be what we want. The answer is sometimes we don't even know what's best. But as much as we know who Jesus is, as much as we know he can and he will and he wants to help, we can trust that he knows what we need, and he is tending to our need. That is why when you pray, you are asking for God's will to be done. My will is secondary at best. My will is definitely not always what's good for me. My will is not always what's best for me. It's generally not what's best for me because I just don't know these things, but God does. And so when you pray with humility and ask humbly, hey, God, I don't really know what I need. Here's what I think I need, but please do what you will, and then see what God does for you from there. He can help, and he is willing to, but you have to ask, and you have to obey. Those are the requirements for you. And if you want God's help, then by all means, you're welcome to it. Luke 5 is really important from that point of view, so hopefully that is of benefit to you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you benefited and learned something from that. And I hope it gives you something to think about as you go. Wednesday, I'll be posting something. Actually, yesterday, I went ahead and recorded Wednesday's class, which will be on how to read the Bible Part 2. It's on translations this time, and some of the differences in translations and, what translation should I use, which ones are the good ones or whatever. I have a few thoughts in there. It's very, very haphazard, very kind of thrown together, but translation is not something I'm super in tune with as far as all the specifics go. I know the generic ideas behind it, and so hopefully there's something in there to inspire some thought. And then on Friday, there is the last part of Matthew chapter 6, not actually the last part, the next section of Matthew chapter 6, which is Matthew 6 verses 19 through 24, talking about the things that you're looking to and where your focus really is. So hopefully those will be of interest and of benefit to you, and I will see you in one of those videos.